Welcome to Redefining What's Possible, your guide to assistive technology in Australia. Join us as we explore practical applications of AT, featuring expert interviews and the latest industry insights to enhance your professional development and to improve client outcomes. Welcome to another episode of the Redefining What's Possible podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Uncle, and I'm joined again today by Stewart McDonagh. Stewart is the Chief Clinical Officer at ILS. He has a wealth of experience in the industry of AT and as an occupational therapist. So welcome again to the podcast, Stu.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. And I wanted to get you back here because last time we spoke a bit about holistic assessment and the importance of holistic assessment for successful AT prescription. And so I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more on that topic today because it's really important. Yeah,
it is. It's an important one to cover off.
It's a really important one. And I think it's important, for everybody who's working with AT, but in particular for our sort of earlier career, new grad OTs who are out there entering the world of AT, because university is wonderful and it equips us with so much theory, but then we get out there and realize that we have to learn so much of it on the job. And I think when it comes to AT prescription, that lack of confidence, the feelings of AT being quite daunting, it makes it quite challenging both for the ATP from our perspective, working for a supplier, but also it's daunting because, if things don't go well and the AT isn't fit for purpose or is abandoned, the consequences can be quite significant. So I think trying to increase people's confidence in AT prescription starts right back from the beginning of that sort of more holistic, comprehensive assessment, and that's why I want to talk to you about that today.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you agree that the theory we receive at university, it's helpful in a lot of ways of what we do, but we just need a more practical experience once we get out there? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so look, going through university, you are obviously exposed to a lot of theoretical concepts throughout your studies. You do have the opportunity to do practical placements whilst at university to apply some of those concepts into practice. But you're very correct in your statement. When you do come out of uni, occupational therapy is such a broad area of practice. There's so many different avenues that you can take the profession into. So you're not always armed with the practical skill set as a new graduate coming out into your chosen area of practice. There is a little bit of learning on the job, I guess, as you enter out into, again, your area of practice. What I will say though, so some of those theoretical concepts that you learn at university are really quite important as a foundation to guide your entry into becoming an occupational therapist. And one of the really important theoretical concepts that you will learn at university is around this holistic framework of OT practice. Mm-hmm. So Sarah, you'll remember it. It was only 20 years ago, so I'm sure you remember it like it was yesterday. Yeah. As we were going through university, one of the OT frameworks that was kind of drilled into us was this Occupational Performance Model Australia.
Yes, okay? I remember it well.
Yeah. So that is an example of a holistic framework that you can use to structure your daily practice. And it is one to this day, 20 years on, that I continue to use in my engagement with clients, my engagement with other allied health professionals, my engagement with clients' families or caregivers. It does allow me to approach my engagement in a very structured, holistic, client-centered format.
Well, let's pick your brain today and learn how to practically apply that same sort of holistic assessment that you've seen be so successful in your work. But before we do, can you give us an example of a time where you saw the prescription of AT be unsuccessful, and why did that occur?
Yeah, so look, I've seen it, multiple times over the years, some of those have been the result of my AT prescription, my personal AT prescription, but that is all stuff that I've had the opportunity to learn from and grow from over my time as an OT and as an ATP working with ILS.
It's actually good to hear that, just to know that we all make mistakes, and it's part of the journey and in our career is to make the mistakes and learn from them and hopefully become a better therapist from that mistake.
Yeah, and be able to support other clinicians with some of those learnings. Other OTs, other ATPs, being in a position now where I can articulate some of those learnings to those individuals with a view that we continue to support outcomes for end users. So look, coming back to your question around an example, so I've seen multiple times over the years where we've been engaged, or I've been engaged as an ATP to come out and reassess a client. Perhaps they've been provided with a powered mobility device, and that powered mobility device, whilst might be fit for purpose to access the client's home environment and maybe access local community, it doesn't meet the requirement to access a modified vehicle. I've actually had that scenario happen multiple times over the last 20 years, where a piece of AT has been prescribed and it doesn't fit into a modified vehicle. So therefore, we've had to go back to the drawing board and kind of start the process again.
Oh, that's so frustrating. Frustrating for everybody, particularly in the amount of time it can take from that sort of initial prescription of AT to when it's actually delivered to the client.
Yeah, so if you think about the process, the client engages, or a support coordinator or a family member engages a clinician to come out and support a recommendation or support a client's goal. So that process itself takes time. Engaging the AT provider to come out and facilitate the trial, writing your funding applications, waiting for your funding application to be approved, and then any delays attached to the supply of AT. So, that can take kind of up to 12 months, right, for a participant to access that piece of AT, and for it not to accommodate their requirements, it can be very disappointing, it can be very frustrating for all parties involved. But most importantly, very frustrating and disappointing for the client who has waited, that period of time for that piece of AT.
Yeah, and that's what we want to try to avoid, right? By doing a holistic assessment.
Correct.
In the beginning. So let's go back to talking about the practicality of performing a holistic assessment. So let's just say you're a healthcare professional, you've got a new referral that comes across your desk. Where do you start?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, it's important that you have got some practice framework. Myself, the Occupational Performance Model Australia has kind of stood with me through my journey as an OT and as an ATP, and in my current role as CCO of ILS. But I guess it's fine to have that holistic framework, but you need to bring it down to a practical level and how that applies to your engagement with your client and family and caregivers. So it's about structuring your assessment in a way to ensure that you are remaining client-centered and that you are able to facilitate a comprehensive assessment of meaningful activities for that client.
Okay. So how do you break it down?
Yeah. Okay. So if I think about, so for myself, I break that assessment down into 6 key areas. So the first one is medical history. So I want to get a comprehensive understanding of the client's medical history. Mm-hmm. The next section is their social history. So I want to get a detailed understanding of their social circumstance as they relate to that individual in the community. I want to get a detailed understanding of their environment or environments in which they're participating in those daily living activities. I then want to have a look at their various different functional statuses or functional capabilities. So that is then broken down into various categories. I'll then take time to look at their history with AT. So have they engaged with AT previously, and have a look at the pros and cons attached to that AT engagement, and then I'll take a view on their goals. So collaborative goal setting.
Okay, so this is a great structure. I really like it. We're going to unpack each of those 6 points in a little bit more detail, if that's okay. Okay, so someone's medical history. What do I need to be considering with their medical history when it comes to the prescription of AT?
Yeah, so look, medical history is obviously a really important one for a health professional to understand. What I will say, getting a detailed understanding of a client's medical history is probably better facilitated in a public health setting or a private health setting, where you've got a multidisciplinary team around you.
Yeah.
However, so if you are working in the community, there can be some challenges or limitations in your ability to. You don't always have access to that holistic team.
Yeah.
But look, regardless, it's really important for you to have a deep understanding of the client's medical history. So that might be, whether if they've got a disease, whether it's progressive or it's stable, do they have an acute or chronic conditions? You need to understand prognosis. You need to understand the implications of their medical condition and or disability as it relates to their function.
Yeah, particularly if the AT you're prescribing needs to be, fit for purpose, not just now, but in say 5 years' time, and what are they going to
correct.
What are they going to be like in 5 years' time?
Correct. So if they've got a progressive neurological condition, you need to take that into consideration in your prescription, right? You're not prescribing for today. You are prescribing for the next 5 years. So that AT that you're prescribing needs to meet that customer's or that client's requirements over the next 5 years. So if it's so the equipment needs to be adaptable, I guess, to their changing needs over that period of time.
Yeah, it does. You then mentioned social history. So what things are we considering when it comes to social history and AT prescription?
Yeah, so look, a lot of individuals living in the community with a medical condition, disability, they may have support from family members or personal care services. So it's really important to understand what social supports they have in place. It's really important to understand their living arrangements, the individuals that are involved in assisting them to remain active, independent in the community. An example of that might be if you have an elderly couple that you're dealing with, the client wants to be able to access the community with the support of a basic manual wheelchair, but the wife may need to be transferring that basic manual wheelchair in and out of the back of her vehicle. So it's really important that in that circumstance, you're taking into consideration the health of the primary caregiver to be able to lift or to stow that manual wheelchair in the back of the vehicle.
Yeah,
if it's too heavy, then you haven't achieved your functional goal of community access.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, you then went on to environment, and you highlight environments. So what were you referring to with that?
Yeah, so environment, a lot of the time we're engaged to facilitate AT trials out in the community in a client's home, right, in a home environment. So obviously that's a really important one, that you are assessing access in and out of the client's home. You are assessing access into all the relevant environments within that client's home. But there are also multiple other environments that you need to be looking at. So that might include the local community. So if the client has a goal to be able to access the local community, it might be a local shopping centre or cafe, make sure that you are trialling it in those environments and factoring that into your AT prescription. Other environments might be, if you're working with a child with a disability, have you looked at their school environment? Have you looked at someone that might be working? Have you looked at their workplace? Another really important one, and we touched on it in the example before, is how is that AT going to be transported? If it needs to be transported out into the community, how is that AT going to be transported? Is it going to be in the boot of a car? Does a powered wheelchair need to be able to access a modified vehicle and be tied down? Is that mobility device going to be occupied, i.e. the client is going to travel in that mobility device during community access? All of those things need to be taken into consideration for your AT prescription or your recommendation around assistive technology.
To avoid the outcome of that, case
correct.
you told us about before.
Correct.
Yeah, it's really important. Okay, then you went into talking about the person's functional capabilities, and you said there were sort of subsections underneath that area.
Yeah.
So talk us through what those subsections would be. And
what so under the header sort of functional status or functional capabilities, there's various points that you may look at. Like functional mobility, functional transfers might be one. Cognition, perception, communication. You might take a view on the client if there's any psychosocial issues. You might have a look at sensory or motor function. You might have a look at self-maintenance tasks. You might look at pressure care, if there's any pressure care issues. You might look at their participation in productivity-related tasks, leisure tasks, as well as rest. They're kind of my key buckets under that functional status or functional capability header.
This is what I love about occupational therapy. Like, that is holistic, right? And that's something that I think our profession does, beyond what other professions do. Not that I'm paying out any other professions, but we're very holistic, and we look at the client, in all those different aspects. And that framework that, we're talking about right now is really helpful in being able to do that well. So I just want to call out a couple of those things you just mentioned, one of them being that functional mobility and transfer. So what kind of things would you be looking at when you're thinking about that area?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're engaging with the client and you're doing an assessment of their functional mobility transfers, quite simply put, you are assessing how are they mobilising, how are they transferring, are they using AT to assist with mobility or transfers, are they using the support of a family member or a carer to assist with that mobility or transfer. And then how, if they're using assistive technology or if they're being supported by those family or personal care workers, how is that engaging with any future AT recommendations that you may have? So, for example, if you're prescribing a powered chair, powered mobility device, and your client is using a floor hoist to transfer, how does that floor hoist interact with your power wheelchair? Does the powered mobility device allow carers to be able to successfully don off a sling? Does the hoist have sufficient leg gating to be able to open out wide enough to fit around the powered mobility device? Does it lift high enough to get the participant out of that mobility device? How does that hoist then interact with other support surfaces? Might be it might be a bed, might be the mattress profile. Does the hoist have sufficient clearance to get under a bed? Does the bed come down low enough or high enough, or whatever it might be, to allow successful transfer of that client from the seated surface to an alternate surface, which in this example is their bed.
Yeah, it's how the AT interacts with other pieces of AT. I really like that as a reminder to always be cognizant of that and to be looking and to make sure and to do trials where you do check, all the different times that AT is going to be used and is it going to be compatible with the other AT. It's really important. And you mentioned psychosocial. I'm a bit intrigued to hear what you have to say, but what did you mean by psychosocial?
Yeah, so psychosocial's an interesting one. It's one that is often overlooked, but quite simply put, psychosocial, like an example, might be someone's body image as it relates to how they perceive themselves as engaging with that AT. So you often hear wheelchair users describe their AT as an extension of their body. So aesthetics can be very important, right down to simple things like colour choice or accent colour choices, or for kids, making it fun and inviting for them to engage with, right? So that's it's a really important element to discuss with your client and their family to ensure, I guess, engagement with that AT to work towards those functional goals.
Yeah. And you called out pressure care, which is my area of passion. So why
It
did
is
you call
your
out
area of
pressure care? It is. I talk about it all the time. But why did you call that out as an area to be considering with functional capabilities of a person?
Yeah, so look, pressure care we call out because a lot of the clients that are living in the community with a disability, medical condition, they've got various risk factors that put them at increased risk, I guess, of obtaining a pressure injury. And some of those risk factors might simply be reduced mobility, incontinence. So I do like to call out pressure care as a standalone point to discuss, just to make sure that we are identifying one, pressure care risk, and two, any history of injury that the client has had.
Yes, and prevent pressure injuries at all costs, because they're horrible. I've met enough people now to have heard, the extent of how painful they are, how much they reduce people's quality of life, and whatever we can do to prevent them is very important. And the last one I wanted to pull out from the ones you said about the functional capabilities was rest. What did you mean by looking at someone's rest?
Yeah, so rest is another one that I guess is often overlooked in the assessment process. When you go out and meet with your client in the community, it's generally during the day. But rest can have quite a meaningful impact on the client, not only during the day where they might need to perhaps take some time out of their wheelchair, for example, onto another surface to offload pressure, but also overnight, right? So considering their positioning of a nighttime. So most of us spend anywhere from sort of 8 to 12 hours, I guess, in bed of a nighttime.
Imagine 12 hours.
I wish 12 hours.
I know, just 8 would be nice.
Let's just say 8 hours. Not everyone has young kids. But we spend a significant amount of time overnight in bed, so resting our bodies. So making sure that is factoring part of your AT assessment, and you are taking the time to understand your client's posture requirements of a night time, as well as their pressure care requirements, right? Particularly if they have those risk factors of reduced mobility or maybe incontinence.
Yeah. And I do think sometimes this can be an area that is overlooked, and there can be this philosophy that when someone's in bed, let's let them be free from any postural supports. But this is another area of passion of mine, because you do see that with the impact of time and gravity, being unsupported in lying can actually be quite detrimental to somebody. And so really looking at the use of AT at rest is something that's also really important for us to consider in a holistic assessment, for sure.
Yeah, and that's it's becoming more topical, I guess, in Australia, in the AT marketplace. Certainly, this whole concept around nighttime positioning, it is certainly something that is becoming a whole lot more topical. And more assistive technology products are becoming available to clients to support goals around nighttime positioning.
Yeah, which is really good, and it's exciting, and it's kind of bringing Australia a bit more in line with what's happening overseas, which is really good. Okay, so moving on to, you then spoke about history with AT. You did mention a little bit about the importance of that. Is there anything in particular we think we should be looking at when it comes to their experience with AT in the past?
Yeah, so just so having that conversation with your client, their families, their carers around previous engagement with AT, I think it's just a really important point. It's a really simple point to get an understanding around what has worked and what hasn't worked for that client to support their goals in the community. Right, you can obtain some pretty good learnings by getting an understanding of previous successes and failures with AT. So it's an important point to drill down into with your clients.
Yeah. And then goal setting.
goal setting is a really important one, right? So you've done this wonderful, holistic, comprehensive, client-centered assessment. So now it's time for you to, pull out the key issues and, set some, everyone's heard of SMART goals, but set some SMART goals in relation to those issues or problems that you've pulled out of your assessment. Sometimes a therapist can have, goals that are related to, maybe a bit more related to the client's medical condition, and your goals might be around, I don't know, like correcting a postural issue, like correcting a pelvic obliquity or a postural a scoliosis in posture. And a client's goals might be a little bit more functional, i.e. I just want to be able to do this activity. So it's really important that when you're setting goals, you're doing so in collaboration with your client, again, with their family, with their caregivers, to ensure that your goals align with the expectations of the client in terms of what they're going to be able to functionally achieve. That'll ensure that the client, the family, the caregivers are engaged in the process.
Yeah, it's really good, really important. And I think everything you've just shared with us, for newer clinicians and clinicians just moving into the AT space, this is really helpful information to ensure that we do have a holistic overview of our client. We've set really, SMART goals that are client-centered, and I think this sets us up to have, successful outcomes with AT. So thank you so much for sharing all of that experience and expertise. Okay. It's really helpful. So one of our closing questions that we ask here, I asked you last time, I'm going to ask you the same question again, so you'll have to think of a different example. So can you describe a time when you have seen AT significantly change a person's life, and how has that inspired you to think differently about your role at work?
Yeah, okay. So what I might, again, I guess this podcast is very geared towards the health professional. So I might go back to a time when I was working as an OT in that public health setting. I do recall a lady, her name was Anne, that presented to our subacute inpatient rehabilitation ward, having suffered quite a significant CVA, so cardiovascular accident. So Anne presented with quite dense left-sided weakness, as well as as well as some pretty significant perceptual and body neglect issues as a result of a CVA. So I guess in that acute setting, so my engagement with Anne, was obviously more focused on her initial rehabilitation post that injury. Now I had the privilege of being involved with Anne over the course of about a 2-year period. Okay. So I worked with her very closely in an inpatient setting. She stayed with us as an inpatient and had very specific goals, I guess, as an inpatient regarding her initial recovery from that CVA. And Anne was, like I said, she was an inpatient for 6 months, but because of the ongoing care requirements that Anne needed to participate in self-maintenance tasks, to feed herself, all of those sort of things, we ended up discharging Anne to a residential aged care facility after 6 months of inpatient rehabilitation. Now Anne was only in her early 50s, so that wasn't really a great outcome for Anne. But look, over the next 18 months, Anne did come in to see us as an outpatient client, and we did work with her quite closely as an outpatient over an 18-month period. And our goals, over that period, they shifted towards getting Anne out into the community, being supported in the community, with various personal care services, with various pieces of assistive technology, to enable her to, again, live more independently in the community and be more social and active in the community. And that was with the support of a multidisciplinary outpatient team. So there's multiple there's multiple services that came together to support Anne to achieve that goal. As it relates to AT, I guess the end result was Anne, living in her own unit, supported by personal care services, with various AT items to support her in the home. So they included, Anne had a quad stick that she used for short distance mobility and for transfers. She had various bathroom aids that allowed her to access her bathroom and the facilities within. She had hospital beds, she had mattresses, all that stuff. But again, the most significant piece of AT for Anne was actually a powered wheelchair, which enabled her to access the local community and access the local cafes and have a coffee with her friends and access the local Westfield. Now that took us a 2-year period with various changing goals and AT prescriptions, and so there might have been various AT goals and therapeutic goals that we worked with Anne over that period. But at the end of the day, she was able to access that local community with the support of that assistive technology device. Anne, as I mentioned earlier, had that left-sided weakness, had that body neglect, and that is something that never fully resolved over the course of that 2-year period. But Anne was able to access the community using a powered mobility device with various strategies that we had taught her to safely cross roads, safely access the community in her powered mobility device. So that was a really positive outcome for Anne. But it took us a while to get there.
Yeah, what a difference that would have made to her life. From when she was discharged from hospital into a residential aged care facility, and then to come to the point where she could live in the community and access the community and meet a friend for a coffee.
Yes.
That's AT being used to really improve someone's quality of life.
Yeah, and look, over the years, they kind of, the goals changed from that sort of initial subacute setting. They changed in terms of her initial engagement in outpatients, and they certainly changed towards the end of her journey with us, which was more, again, focused on community access, safety in the community, safety in that home environment.
Yeah, it's a good story. And it just shows as well that, it takes time. Setting some of those goals be achieved, and the goals have to get rewritten and new goals come, and it all takes time. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that story, Stu. And thank you for sharing your expertise today. I think we'll probably get you back to share some more, because you've got a lot of gold to share with us as healthcare professionals. So thank you.
And thank you again.
You're welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today, and we will catch you in the next episode. Bye.